The candles burned low in the great ballroom of Ashbourne House, and the smell of melting wax mixed with the perfume of too many women pressed too close together. Vivian Marchwood stood near the tall window at the far end of the room, where the heavy curtains made a small pocket of shadow. She had stood in this exact spot for the past 3 balls of the season. She had counted the panes of glass behind her many times. There were 12. She knew this the way she knew the number of buttons on her glove and the number of steps between her bedchamber and the breakfast room at her aunt's house in Mayfair. Small numbers were a kind of comfort. They did not change. They did not look at her with pity or with hunger or with that thin, sharp smile that meant a woman had decided you were not worth her trouble. The music started up again. A country dance, lively and bright, the kind that made the floor shake under the dancers' feet. Vivian watched the couples form their lines. She watched the young women laughing behind their fans. She watched the mothers whispering near the wall. She did not watch anyone face for too long. That was a rule she had learned in her first season 4 years ago, when she was 18 and still believed that someone would cross the room for her. Now she was 22, and she had learned to keep her eyes moving, so that no one would catch her hoping. Her gloves were too tight at the wrist. She tugged at the left one with 2 fingers, the way she always did, smoothing the silk against her skin. Then she did the right one. Then she touched the small pearl pin in her hair to make sure it had not slipped. This was her routine, 3 small movements in the same order, every quarter hour. It was the thing she did when her hands wanted to do something else, like wring themselves together or press against her stomach where the corset bit too hard. The gloves and the pin were her armor. They told her she still had a body, that the body was still hers, that the candlelight could not make her disappear, no matter how long she stood in shadow. The room smelled of beeswax and lemon polish and the faint, sour smell of bodies that had been dancing for 2 hours. Somewhere near the punch table, a footman dropped a glass, and the small, bright crash made a few heads turn. Vivian did not turn. She watched the chandelier instead, the way the wax slid down the sides of the candles in slow, pale ribbons. She thought, if she stood very still, she could feel the cold air from the window seeping through the curtain at her back. It was October, and outside the gardens were thick with wet leaves, and the smell of them came in through a crack in the sash. Wet leaves and wood smoke and the iron tang of the iron stair rail under her hand when she had come down earlier. She held these smells inside her head like a private map. They were hers. The ballroom was not hers, but the smells were. Her aunt, Lady Carow, stood across the room with 3 other matrons. Lady Carow had told her before they entered to smile more and to stand near the door so that gentlemen might find her easily. Vivian had said yes, of course, and then she had walked to the window instead. Lady Carow had not noticed yet. Lady Carow was busy explaining something to a woman in a purple turban, and her hands were moving the way they moved when she was talking about money or about marriage, which were often the same subject. A young woman in pale yellow swept past Vivian, trailing a cloud of orange flower scent. The young woman did not see her. This was not cruelty. Vivian knew the difference between cruelty and not seeing. Cruelty required notice first. Not seeing was the older sister of cruelty, and it was the one Vivian had been raised by. She turned her head a little, just enough to watch the door. New guests had been arriving for the past hour. The footman at the door announced each name, and the names floated across the room and were caught up in the chatter and lost. Vivian had stopped listening. Names were for people who wanted to be found. Then the room changed. She felt it before she saw it. The chatter did not stop exactly, but it shifted. The pitch of it dropped. The matrons near the wall straightened their backs. The young women near the punch table glanced toward the door and then quickly away, the way one glances at the sun. A footman near the wall set down the tray he had been holding, picked it up again, and adjusted his cuffs. Vivian had never seen a footman adjust his cuffs in the middle of service. She turned her head fully now, and she looked. A man had come in. He was not handsome in the way the room would have called handsome. His face was too still for that. He was tall, but not the tallest man in the room. His coat was black and very plain, with no embroidery at the cuffs, no gold at the collar, only the clean line of good cloth against a broad shoulder. His hair was dark and a little too long. His eyes were the kind of eyes that did not move quickly. They went over the room once, slowly, the way a man might check a stable he had not entered in some time. Around him, the room was rearranging itself without seeming to. Lady Ashbourne, the hostess, had appeared at his elbow as if she had been pulled there by a string. Two young women in white had drifted closer to where he was standing.
A man Vivian did not know was already bowing.
The Duke, because of course it was a duke, only a duke made a room behave like that, gave a small nod to Lady Ashbourne and said something short. Lady Ashbourne laughed, too brightly, and then turned to gesture at the young women. Vivian looked away. Whatever this was, it was not for her. She tugged the cuff of her left glove, then the right one. Then she touched the pearl pin. Then she looked back at the chandelier. She could not have said how long it was before she felt the change again. Perhaps a minute, perhaps longer. The music had moved into a slower piece now, a minuet, and the dancers were forming new lines. Then something in the air shifted, and Vivian, without meaning to, looked toward the door again. He was looking at her, not glancing, not scanning, looking. His gaze had stopped on her the way a horse stops in a road and refuses to move. Lady Ashbourne was still speaking at his elbow, gesturing toward one of the young women in white, and he was not listening. He was looking at Vivian by the window, and he was not pretending he was not. Heat climbed up the back of her neck. She had not blushed in a year, perhaps 2, and she did not blush now. But the heat was there, low and steady, like the warmth from a hand placed on the back of her chair. She turned her face away. She tugged her glove. She willed him to look elsewhere. She counted the panes of glass in the window. 12, always 12. When she looked back, he was still watching her, and then, while Lady Ashbourne was still mid-sentence, and one of the young women in white was already lifting her chin to be introduced, he stepped past them. He simply walked through the small crowd around him as if it had not formed. Lady Ashbourne's mouth was still open. The young woman in white made a small, embarrassed sound and pretended she had been about to speak to her friend all along. He was crossing the room. He was crossing the room toward Vivian. She understood this slowly, the way one understands that a roof is on fire. He moved without hurry. He moved like a man who had decided on a thing and now was only carrying out the decision. People stepped aside for him. A girl with a pink fan gave a sharp little curtsy that he did not seem to see. A grey-haired gentleman tried to catch his eye and failed. Vivian's hand went to her glove, then to her pin. Then she made it stop, because she did not want him to see her hands moving. She lifted her chin. She made her face flat and polite, the face she had practiced in the glass when she was 19, the face that said nothing, asked for nothing, offered nothing. He stopped 2 paces from her, close enough that she could see his eyes were grey, not blue, and very tired. Close enough that she could smell him, rain and wood smoke and something underneath, something like good leather warmed by the body, something like clean linen pressed with rosemary. The honest smells of a man who had ridden somewhere and not yet washed it off. "Miss Marchwood," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected. Quieter, too. He said her name the way one says the name of a book one has already read. She did not curtsy. She inclined her head, the small, exact inclination she gave to anyone she did not know. "Your Grace," she said, because she had heard Lady Ashbourne say it 3 minutes ago, and she had not forgotten. "You have me at a disadvantage. I do not believe we have been introduced." "No," he said, "we have not." He did not explain. He did not move. The matrons by the wall had stopped speaking. Lady Carrow, across the room, had gone very still, her painted fan halfway to her face. Vivian could feel the eyes on her like small warm hands all over her back. The musicians were beginning a new piece, a waltz. The waltz was still new enough that the older women muttered about it, and Lady Caro had told Vivian never to dance one, because the man's hand at a woman's waist was not what nice girls allowed in a public room. The Duke, Vivian still did not know his full name, only the title, glanced once at the floor where couples were beginning to gather. Then back at her. "Will you dance with me?" he said. It was not a question. It was not exactly a command either. It was a sentence laid down between them, flat and clear, like a stone placed in the middle of a path. Vivian looked at him. She looked at his quiet grey eyes and his too long hair and his plain black coat with no embroidery at the cuffs. She looked at the small crowd that had gathered, not too close, but close enough to listen. She saw the girl in pink, watching with her mouth a little open. She saw Lady Ashbourne, looking as if she had eaten something she could not quite swallow. She saw, far across the room, her aunt, whose face had gone the colour of new paper. A waltz, in front of everyone, with a man she did not know, who had crossed the room past 3 young women bred for exactly this purpose, and stopped in front of the woman by the window whom nobody asked. She thought, this is a joke. Someone has wagered him. Someone in his club, perhaps. Dance with the dullest girl in the room, and we will pay your tailor. She thought, or he wants something from my uncle, and this is a kindness done sideways. She thought, or there is some mistake. He thinks I am someone else. What she said was, no.
The word came out quiet, quieter than the music, but near enough that the people standing closest heard it. The girl in pink made a small, fluttering sound. Someone, farther back, said something under her breath. Lady Ashbourne lifted her fan. The Duke did not move. His face did not change. He held her eyes for a long moment, and Vivian understood, with a small sharp turn in her stomach, that he had heard her exactly and was not surprised. No, she said again, because once was perhaps not enough. Thank you, Your Grace. I do not dance the waltz. It was not quite the truth. She did dance the waltz very well in the empty drawing room at her aunt's house when no one was looking. But the truth was not owed here, in this lit room, with everyone watching. He inclined his head. It was almost a bow, but not quite. Another dance, then? No, she said. Thank you. I am not dancing this evening. For one breath she thought he might press. He did not. He stepped back a single pace. He looked at her once more, and there was something in his eyes that she could not name. Not anger, not hurt, more like a man marking the location of a thing he meant to come back to. Then he bowed properly, a clean small bow, and turned away. He did not walk to the young women in white. He walked to the side of the room where the older men were, and he was swallowed up by them at once. Vivian did not move. She could feel her own breath against the inside of her lips. The music went on. The dancers swept into the waltz. Couples began to turn slowly across the floor, and the air filled with the rustle of skirts and the small breaths of women trying not to step on their own hems. Lady Caro was crossing the room. Vivian saw her coming the way one sees a storm cloud over a field. Her aunt arrived in a hush of lavender silk, and her painted fan was working very hard. "Vivian," her aunt said in a voice as low and as fast as rain on glass, "tell me what just happened." "He asked me to dance," Vivian said, "and I declined." Her aunt closed her eyes. She opened them again. "You declined?" "Yes. You declined the Duke of Ravensmere." The name meant something. Vivian could see that. She did not know the man, but she knew the name from a letter, 4 years old, folded twice and kept in the box at the bottom of her father's writing desk, before he had died. Her father had written, in his careful hand, that there was a private agreement between his old friend, the late Duke of Ravensmere, and himself. That, should both gentlemen still wish it when the time was right, Vivian would one day be presented to the new young Duke, and a marriage might be considered.
The old Duke had died not long after her own father.
The new Duke had been abroad in some war, in some country whose name she had not learned to spell. The agreement had never been spoken of since. Vivian, in the last 4 years, had folded it away with everything else she did not let herself think about. Until this moment, in this lit room, with the smell of rain and wood smoke still in her nose. "The Duke of Ravensmere," her aunt said again, and now her voice had gone thin. "Vivian, do you know who that is?" "I know the name," Vivian said. "Your father," her aunt began, and then she stopped, because she had seen something in Vivian's face. She closed her fan with a sharp, small snap. "We will speak of this at home." The waltz ended. Another dance began. The Duke of Ravensmere did not look across the room at Vivian again. He stood among the older men, with his hands clasped lightly behind his back, listening to a grey-haired earl tell him something at length. He looked, from where Vivian stood, like a man who was thinking about something else entirely. She tugged at her left glove, then her right. Then she touched the pearl pin. Then she counted the panes of glass in the window behind her. 12. Still 12. The carriage ride home was quiet for the first quarter-mile. Then Lady Carow began. She did not shout. Lady Carow never shouted. She spoke in a low, steady voice, as if she were reading aloud from a book she did not enjoy. Vivian sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened. The matter, as Lady Carow laid it out, was simple. The Duke of Ravensmere had returned to England only that week. He had been on the continent for nearly 4 years, on business of state that Lady Carow did not pretend to understand. His estate, Renfield, lay in Hampshire and was one of the great houses of the country. He was unmarried. He was, in fact, the unmarried man whose name had been on the lips of every mother of a daughter for the last 3 months. And there had been an agreement. Lady Carow had known of it vaguely, though she had not believed it would come to anything. Vivian's father, before his death, had written to the late Duke. The two old friends had agreed in principle that should the new Duke wish it, Vivian would be his wife. The agreement was not a binding contract. It was a wish between 2 old men who had served together as young soldiers and never quite forgotten it. Vivian had not been told because Vivian's father had died before the Duke could be informed, and the late Duke had died not long after, and then Vivian had been a girl in mourning, and there had been no proper way to raise the matter without making her hope. "And tonight," Lady Carow said, "tonight the new Duke of Ravensmere walked across that room past every girl in England, and he asked you to dance. Do you understand what that means, Vivian? Do you understand what he was saying?" "He did not say anything," Vivian said. "He asked me to dance. He was saying that he remembers. He could have written." Lady Carow drew in a long breath through her nose. "Vivian. He could have come to call. He could have sent his card. He could have done any one of 100 things that did not require me to be stared at by Lady Ashbourne and 3 girls who were standing closer to him than I have ever stood to anyone." Vivian's voice did not rise. It only grew very even. "He chose a ballroom. He chose a waltz. He chose to embarrass me, Aunt, before he chose to know me." Lady Carow looked at her for a long moment. The carriage lamp threw a thin yellow light across her face. "You did not know who he was," she said. "No, I did not." "He may not have known you did not know." Vivian said nothing to that. She had not considered it. She turned her face to the carriage window. Outside, the streets were wet and shining, and a lamplighter was working his way along the railings, and the smell of coal smoke came in through the carriage door, sharp and cold. "You will receive him when he calls," Lady Carow said finally. "He will not call." "He will," her aunt said. "I have not been a fool for 40 years, child. He will call. And when he does, you will receive him." Vivian did not answer. She tugged the cuff of her left glove, although it was too dark now to see whether the silk lay flat. He did not call the next day, or the day after. By the 3rd day, Lady Carow had stopped pacing past the windows, and by the 4th, Vivian had decided that she had been right, and her aunt had been wrong, and that the matter was closed. She slept badly that night anyway. She woke twice and lay in the dark and thought about the smell of rain and wood smoke, and the way he had said her name, the way one says the name of a book one had already read. He came on the 5th day. There was no card sent ahead. There was only the knock at the door and the voice of Lady Carrow's butler answering it, and the small intake of her aunt's breath in the next room. Vivian, who was sitting by the window with a book she was not reading, heard the heavy boots in the hall and knew them before she saw them. He was shown into the small drawing room at the back of the house, not the front parlour with the gilt mirror, because Lady Carrow had decided this called for less formality, not more. Vivian came down the stairs slowly. She did not run her hand along the banister. She did not let her skirts rustle. He was standing by the window when she entered, the way she had stood by the window 5 nights ago. He turned at the sound of the door. The light came in over his shoulder and made the line of his coat sharp against the pale curtain. "Miss Marchwood," he said. "Your Grace." Lady Carrow had not come in with her. This was deliberate, Vivian understood. Her aunt was somewhere just on the other side of the half-open door, where her hearing was excellent, and her shadow could not be seen. "Will you sit?" he said. "I will stand," Vivian said. He nodded once, as if he had expected this, and remained standing as well. He did not move toward her. He stayed by the window. The morning light caught the grey in his eyes and made them look almost colourless. "I owe you an apology," he said. She had been ready for many things. She had not been ready for that. "I should not have approached you as I did," he said. "I should not have asked you to dance the waltz in a room full of people who would make a meal of it for a fortnight. I knew better, and I did it anyway because I had been told you would be at that ball, and I had been at sea for 3 weeks, and I had not slept properly in 5 nights, and I wanted to see you with my own eyes before I lost my courage. That is the truth of it. I am sorry." He did not move while he spoke. He did not soften his voice. He laid the sentences down the way he had laid down the question to dance, plain, exact, without ornament. Vivian did not answer at once. Her hands wanted to find her gloves, and her gloves were upstairs in the dressing room, so her hands found one another instead, folding quietly at her waist. "You knew who I was," she said. "I did not know who you were. I assumed you would have been told. My father is dead, Your Grace. The friend who would have told me is also dead. I had read a letter once, 4 years ago. I had folded it away. I did not know that you had ever come back." He absorbed this without moving. His mouth tightened a little at one corner. "Then I owe you a second apology, and a longer one. Why did you come back?" He looked at her for a long moment before he answered. "Because my father, before he died, wrote me a letter," he said. "I received it abroad. He told me in it about his old friend who had also died, and the daughter of that friend, and what they had wished between them. He did not order me to anything. He said only that he had thought, in the long years of their friendship, that the 2 of them between them might have made one good marriage out of their 2 children, and that it would have given him quiet pleasure to have seen it. That was the whole of the letter on that subject." He paused. The smell of rain came in through the open window, although it was not raining yet. "I came home for many reasons," he said, "but that letter was one of them. I asked when I came up to town whether you were still in London. I was told you would be at Lady Ashburn's ball. I went there intending only to be in the same room, to see what kind of woman you had grown into, and to decide whether I would have the right to ask, properly, for an introduction. And then I saw you." "You saw me," Vivian said. "Standing by the window," he said, "doing nothing, touching the cuff of your glove, looking at the chandelier, not waiting for anyone, not pretending." Her breath caught a little, and she made it stop catching. "I forgot what I had meant to do," he said. "I walked across the room. I should not have. It was the act of a tired man and a rude one. It made you the subject of every drawing-room conversation in London for the next week, and that was not my right. I am sorry for it. I will be sorry for it for a long while." He stopped. He did not fill the silence with anything else. He waited. Vivienne looked at him. She looked at his too long hair and the small line between his brows and the way his hands stayed quiet at his sides while he spoke. She thought of the girl in pink with her mouth open. She thought of Lady Ashburn's face. She thought of her aunt's voice in the carriage. "I do not forgive easily," she said. "No," he said. "I would not expect you to. I am not going to forgive you today, Your Grace. I did not come for that today." "What did you come for, then?" "To say what I came to say," he said, "and to ask whether you would permit me to call again. Properly this time, with my card sent ahead, at a reasonable hour, with no expectation." Vivienne did not answer for a long moment. The clock on the mantel ticked, and somewhere in the back of the house a kettle was boiling, and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen drifted up the back stairs. The honest smells of a morning. "You may call again," she said. "Thank you. I am not promising anything beyond receiving you. I have not asked for anything beyond that." He bowed. It was the same small, clean bow he had given her in the ballroom. He moved past her toward the door, and as he passed her, the smell of rain and leather and warm linen came with him again. He paused at the threshold. "My name," he said, "is Dorian Ashe." He had not said it before. The title was the title. It sat on him like the coat he wore. The name was a different thing. It was a man's name. He had given it to her after the apology, not before. She understood vaguely that this was the order he had chosen on purpose. "Mr. Ashe," she said. He almost smiled at that. He did not quite. He left. She did not see him for 10 days after that. He sent a card on the 2nd day. He sent another with a short note on the 4th. He called very briefly on the 7th, and they spoke for a quarter of an hour in Lady Carrow's small parlour, while her aunt sewed in the corner and pretended not to listen. He did not stay for tea. He did not ask any large questions. He asked her instead about a book that lay on the table beside her. She had been reading the poems of a Scottish writer her father had liked, and he said he had not read them, and she said she would lend him hers if he liked, and he said he would prefer to find his own copy, and that was the whole of it. When he was gone, her aunt put down her sewing and said, "Well." "Well," Vivienne said, "you did not laugh once." "I did not." "You did not smile?" "No." "He did not seem to expect it." "No," Vivienne said. "He did not." The second visit was longer. He came on a Thursday afternoon, when the rain had finally begun, and the house smelled of wet wool and the coal smoke from the fire. He had walked. His boots had to be left in the hall, and his great coat was carried away to dry. He sat across from her in his stocking feet for a quarter of an hour before her aunt brought him a pair of her late husband's house slippers, and he wore them without comment, and her aunt looked at him as if she had decided something. They talked of the book of Scottish poems. He had bought one. He had read 3 of them. He liked the second one and could not understand the first. Vivienne said the first one was not very good and that he should not feel he had failed at it. He laughed for the first time then. It was a small laugh, low in his chest, and it was over very quickly. But she heard it, and she understood that he did not give it away often. They saw each other 6 times over the next 2 weeks, twice at her aunt's house, twice at small gatherings, not balls, smaller things, a musical evening at a friend's, an afternoon in a public garden, and once briefly by accident in a bookseller's shop in the Burlington Arcade. He had been holding a thin red volume of essays. She had been holding a slim brown one of letters. They had stood in the narrow aisle between the shelves and spoken in low voices for 10 minutes about whether essays or letters told one more about a writer. The bookseller had pretended very loudly not to notice them. He did not press her. He did not, in all those days, ask her again to dance. He did not speak again of the agreement between their fathers, although they both knew it was there between them like a third person in the room. When he looked at her steadily, the way he had looked at her across the ballroom. But he looked at her less often than she would have expected. He did not stare. He gave her the room to breathe. Vivian did not say any of this aloud. She wrote some of it down in a small journal she kept in the bottom drawer of her writing desk. She wrote one night, in her plain, careful hand, "He has not asked me to be anything I am not." She underlined the sentence once. Then she closed the book and put it away. The trouble began at Lady Ashbourne's second ball of the season. It was 3 weeks after the first. Lady Ashbourne had not forgiven Vivian for declining the waltz. Lady Ashbourne had a niece, a young woman named Cecily Hadley, who was 18 and very pretty, and who had been the girl in white standing closest to the Duke that first night. Cecily Hadley had not forgiven Vivian either. Cecily found her near the punch table. Vivian was not by the window this time. She was standing with 2 other young women she knew slightly, both of them pleasant, both of them married, both of them safe. Cecily came up to them with her chin lifted and her painted fan working slowly. "Miss Marchwood," Cecily said. "Miss Hadley." "I do hope you mean to dance tonight," Cecily said. The 2 married women looked at one another. "Or perhaps you mean to stand again. You stand so very well. My aunt said as much only this morning. She said you had a great talent for standing." It was not quite a slap. Cecily Hadley was not skilled enough for a real slap. But she had been practicing the line in the carriage on the way here, and it landed close enough. The 2 married women looked down at their gloves and did not laugh. Vivian held very still. She did not tug her glove. She did not touch her pin. She had been training, without knowing it, for moments like this since she was 18. She knew that the worst thing she could do was let her hand move. "Thank you," she said after a small breath. "That is kind of your aunt to say." Cecily's eyes brightened. She had not expected an easy target. "I only wonder," she said, more loudly now because there were people standing nearby and her voice had carried at the start, and there was no use whispering after, "what it is the Duke can possibly want with a woman who refuses to dance, who refuses to laugh, and who, I am told, does not even know who she has been promised to. One does wonder what kind of bride that makes, or whether she means to refuse him also when the moment comes. After all, she has had 4 seasons to refuse a great many men, and she has." The 2 married women had stopped looking at their gloves. Their faces were very still. The little circle around the punch table had widened, the way a circle widens when something is about to happen in the middle of it. Lady Ashbourne, 10 feet away, had turned her head and made no effort to hide it. Vivian thought, very clearly, she has said it now. She has named it. She has told the room about the agreement, and about the 4 years, and about the refusal. She has done it on purpose. She has been waiting for the chance. Vivian thought just as clearly, I will not cry. I will not raise my voice. I will not do any of the things she wants me to do. She set down her glass of lemonade. She did this slowly, on the corner of the table where the marble was unstained, so that the glass would not leave a ring. She straightened. She looked Cecily Hadley in the face. "Miss Hadley," she said, in a voice that was not loud, but that the people standing near them could hear. "I am sorry that I have given you so much to think about. I had not realized I was so often in your thoughts. I hope you will forgive me for taking up the space." She inclined her head, exactly as she had inclined it for the Duke at the ball 3 weeks before. The same small, exact movement. She turned. She did not look at the 2 married women. She did not look at Lady Ashbourne. She walked, in a perfectly steady line, away from the punch table, and across the long ballroom, and out through the door into the corridor, where the air was cooler and smelled of the wet garden. She did not run. She did not stagger. She walked, the way she had walked 5 nights ago after declining the waltz, the way she had walked out of every difficult room of her life. Her hands at her sides, her chin level, her breath quiet. The corridor was empty. There was a side passage that led to a small terrace at the back of the house. She turned into it. She set her hand flat against the cold stone of the wall. She let her forehead almost touch it. She breathed, once, in and out, slowly. Her eyes were stinging, but she would not let them do anything more than sting. She thought, count the panes. There were no panes here. There was only stone. She counted the stones instead. 8 from her elbow to the corner. She counted them twice. She did not hear him come in. He must have come the long way around, through the supper room and out the side door, because when she lifted her head he was at the end of the corridor, and he was not breathing hard, but his face had a tightness around the mouth that she had not seen before. "Miss Marchwood." She did not answer at first. She straightened. She lowered her hand from the wall. She made her face flat. "Your Grace." He crossed the corridor in 3 long steps and stopped before he was too close. He did not touch her. He did not reach for her. "I saw," he said. "I know. I heard most of it. I gathered." He looked at her, and there was something working behind the grey of his eyes, slow and very steady. "What would you like me to do?" he said. It was not the question she had expected. She had expected an apology, or an offer to take her home, or some grand and embarrassing speech that would make the moment worse. He had asked her instead what she wanted. "Nothing," she said. "I do not want you to do anything. I want to go home. I will call your aunt's carriage." "Thank you." "Will you wait here, or will you wait in the front hall?" "Here." He nodded. He did not move at once. He looked at her for another moment, and then he said very quietly, "She will not say that to you again." "Your Grace." "Not by my doing," he said, "if that is your worry. I will not call her out, or her aunt either. I will not make a scene. I do not need to. She will not say it again because she will hear by tomorrow morning that she has misjudged the room she said it in. That is all." He inclined his head. He went. She stood in the corridor for another quarter of an hour before her aunt came to find her. Lady Carrow did not ask her what had happened. Lady Carrow had heard. The footman had heard. By now half the ballroom had heard. Her aunt simply took her arm and walked her to the carriage and sat with her in the dark while the wheels rattled them home through the wet streets. That night, in his study at the great house in Berkeley Square, the Duke of Ravensmere did not go to bed. He sat in the leather chair by his fire with a glass of brandy that he did not drink. He did not pace. He did not stare into the flames in the way men in poor stories did. He thought. He thought first about Cecily Hadley. He thought about her aunt. He thought about Lady Ashbourne, who had stood 10 feet from the punch table and turned her head and watched. He understood that Lady Ashbourne had not arranged the moment exactly, but she had not stopped it either. And she had been pleased by it, and she would be pleased by every retelling of it for the next 3 weeks, if no one took it away from her. He thought about Vivian Marchwood standing in the corridor with her hand on the wall. He had not seen her cry. He understood that this was important. He understood that she would have hated for him to see her cry, and he understood that this would have changed something between them in a way that could not be repaired. He had seen her hand on the wall. He had seen the count she was making in her head. He had seen her decide in a quarter of a second not to break. He did not think about love. He had not let himself think about love in the 8 years since he was a young man in Spain, and a young woman had laughed at him for being slow to understand a joke, and he had decided afterward that he was a man better suited to other kinds of feeling. He thought instead about the practical matter, what was to be done, what he could do, and what he could not, and what he must. He took a piece of paper from the writing desk. He wrote 3 short notes. The first was to his secretary, with 3 instructions. The second was to his solicitor in Lincoln's Inn, with 1, The third was a longer note, in his own hand, to Lady Carrow. He sealed all three. He left them on the salver in the hall for the morning post. He poured the brandy back into the decanter and went to bed. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 things had happened that Vivian Marchwood did not know about. The first was that Cecily Hadley's father, a man named Sir Aubrey Hadley, who held a small but treasured position as a magistrate in a part of Hampshire that lay within a half-day's ride of the Duke's own estate, received a brief, courteous letter from the Duke's man of business. The letter informed Sir Aubrey that the Duke had taken an interest in a parcel of land that adjoined the Hadley estate, and that the Duke proposed to deal with Sir Aubrey directly should the matter advance. The letter was not threatening. It was, if anything, complimentary. But Sir Aubrey, reading it twice, understood that a great deal more had been said inside it than had been written, and he sat with the letter on his knee for some time. The second was that Lady Ashbourne received at her own home a card from the Duke of Ravensmere, expressing his regrets that he would not be able to accept her invitation to dine on the following Friday, as he had a previous engagement. Lady Ashbourne had not yet sent the invitation. She had only mentioned it 3 days before, in a tone of great confidence, as a thing she meant to do. She held the card a long time and put it down very carefully, and rang for tea. The third was that the Duke of Ravensmere himself, on Tuesday morning, walked into the dining room of the small house in Mayfair, where a thin, elderly woman named Mrs. Pratt lived, on a thin, elderly pension. Mrs. Pratt had been the Duke's nurse when he was a boy, and her pension came from his estate. And it was, when the Duke had checked the books the night before, embarrassingly small. The Duke sat at her table for 3/4 of an hour. He drank weak tea. He doubled her pension before he left. He also, in passing, mentioned that he had been told a great kindness many years ago by a young Miss Marchwood, who had once, on a visit with her father, sat with Mrs. Pratt by the fire and read aloud to her from the newspaper for a full hour while everyone else had gone in to dinner. Mrs. Pratt remembered the visit. Mrs. Pratt remembered the girl. She told the Duke so in considerable detail. The Duke listened. He thanked her. He left. Mrs. Pratt was a woman who wrote a great many letters. She wrote them slowly, in a shaky hand, but she wrote a great many, and she wrote, that week, to 2 old friends in Hampshire, and to her niece in Yorkshire, and to the woman who had been the housekeeper at the old Marchwood house in Sussex. In each letter she said, in passing, that the Duke of Ravensmere had been to see her, and that they had spoken of dear Miss Vivian, and that the Duke had said, not in so many words, but Mrs. Pratt could read between any man's lines, that he held the young lady in the highest regard. The Duke did not tell Vivian about Mrs. Pratt. He did not tell her about Sir Aubrey Hadley or about the unsent invitation. He did not tell her about any of it. He had not done it for her thanks. On Thursday, the Duke called at Lady Carrow's house. He was shown into the small drawing-room, and Vivian came down, and she was wearing a grey morning gown the colour of pigeon feathers, and her hair was pinned simply, and she looked tired but steady. "Miss Marchwood," he said. "Your Grace." "I have come to speak with you," he said, "about a matter that should have been spoken of long ago. I would be grateful if your aunt were present." Lady Carrow came in. She did not pretend not to have been listening on the other side of the door. She sat in her usual chair. She folded her hands. "I am here," the Duke said, "because my father, before his death, wrote to your father, and the 2 of them had between them a wish, an agreement, an understanding, you may call it what you like, that one day, if both parties wished it, you and I might be married. I was abroad when both of them died. I was abroad when you came out into society. I was abroad when you should have been told of this and you were not. None of that is your fault. Very little of it is mine. But I have returned now, and the agreement remains, between you and me, unfinished business." Lady Carrow's hands did not move. Vivian's hands did not move. "I will not press you to it," he said. "An agreement between 2 dead men is no contract. You may say no to me now, and there will be no consequence to your name. I will say, publicly, that I have no claim. I will say it tomorrow. I will say it in writing if you wish." He paused. He looked at Vivian. He did not look at Lady Carrow. "I am asking you, Miss Marchwood, to marry me," he said. "Not because of the agreement, not because of our fathers, because of you, as you have been in the rooms I have shared with you in the last month, and because of you, as you were the night you walked out of Lady Ashburn's ball with your head up, and because of you, as you stood by the window in your gloves on the night I first saw you, doing nothing at all, and not pretending. I am asking you because I have not, in a great many years, looked at another person and thought I would like to have my life beside that one. I am thinking it now." The room was very quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked. Somewhere outside a dog was barking, and the smell of the street, wet stone, horses, smoke, came in through the small open window. "I do not need an answer today," he said. "I will not need one tomorrow. I will not press you for one ever. You may take as long as you need. If you say no, I will accept it. If you say yes, I will be grateful for the rest of my life. That is all I came to say." He bowed. He moved toward the door. Vivian said, "Please wait." He stopped. He did not turn around at once. He turned slowly, and his face was the same quiet face she had first seen across the ballroom. "I will not give you an answer today," she said. "No," he said, "I did not expect one. But I will ask you one question, if you will answer it honestly." "I will." "At the ball," she said, "the first ball, when you crossed the room, you knew there would be talk. You knew everyone would be staring. You knew Cecily Hadley and her aunt and Lady Ashbourne would not forgive me for a year. You knew you were not making my life easier. Why?" The Duke stood by the door. He did not lean against it. He did not put his hand on the frame. He stood like a man taking the question very seriously. "Because I had seen you," he said, "and because, if I had not crossed the room then, I would have spent the rest of the evening watching you from across it, and I would have hated myself for being a coward. I would have left without speaking, and I would have gone home, and I would have spent the night thinking about a woman by a window I had not had the courage to address. I have spent enough nights in my life thinking about things I did not have the courage to do. I did not want one more." Vivian did not answer at once. The clock ticked. Lady Carrow drew in a breath and let it out. "Thank you," Vivian said. "For what?" "For not making a prettier answer." He almost smiled. He did not quite. He bowed again, and he left. She did not give him her answer for 10 more days. In the 10 days, several things happened. Mrs. Pratt's letters reached Hampshire and Yorkshire and Sussex, and the talk in those counties began to swing in a new direction. Sir Aubrey Hadley wrote to his daughter at her aunt's house in London and instructed her in plain terms that she was to apologize to Miss Marchwood at the earliest opportunity, and that he did not wish to hear the name Marchwood spoken with any tone he would have to correct. Lady Ashburn's footman, in the course of an afternoon errand, was overheard by a maid to say that his mistress had eaten little for 2 days and had been very short with the staff, and the maid told her cousin, who told a friend, and so on. Vivian did not know all of this. She knew some of it. Mrs. Pratt's letter reached the old Marchwood housekeeper, who wrote in her turn to Vivian, who had not had a letter from the housekeeper in 2 years. Vivian read the letter twice. She read the part about the Duke twice. Then she set the letter down on her writing desk and looked at it for a long time, the way one looks at a piece of news one cannot decide whether to believe. She did not ask the Duke about Mrs. Pratt. She did not ask the Duke about Sir Aubrey Hadley. She did not ask the Duke about Lady Ashburn. She thought instead about a man who had walked into a small house in Mayfair to drink weak tea with an old woman and double a pension that no one would have noticed was small. She thought about it for a long time. On the 11th day, she walked across Berkeley Square in a steady grey rain, with her aunt's footman 2 paces behind her, holding an umbrella, and she presented her card at the front door of the great house of the Duke of Ravensmere, and she asked, in a perfectly calm voice, whether His Grace was at home. He was. She was shown into a library that smelled of old leather and beeswax, and a fire that had been burning since morning. He was standing by a tall window when she came in. He turned at the sound of the door. "Miss Marchwood, Your Grace." The footman who had shown her in withdrew. The door clicked shut. There were no chaperones now. She had not brought one. Her aunt had argued briefly, and then had stopped arguing, and had told her only to be home before dark. "I came," Vivian said, "to give you my answer." He did not move. He did not ask her to sit. He understood that she was going to do this standing. "I came also," she said, "to tell you what I have learned. About Mrs. Pratt, and about Sir Aubrey Hadley, and about Lady Ashburn's unsent invitation." The smallest change moved in his face. It was gone before she could be certain it had been there. "Mrs. Pratt wrote to my old housekeeper," she said. "My old housekeeper wrote to me. I have other friends in Hampshire. They have written too. You did not tell me any of it." "No," he said, "I did not." "Why?" "Because I did not do it for you to know. You did some of it for me. I did some of it because Mrs. Pratt has been underpaid for 9 years by an estate that owes her better, and I should have seen to it the week I returned and did not. I did some of it because Sir Aubrey Hadley is a magistrate, and a magistrate ought to know what is said in his name. I did some of it because Lady Ashburn hosted a gathering at which a young woman was insulted in her drawing room, and she chose not to intervene, and I do not dine with people who watch a thing like that and turn their heads." He paused. He looked at her steadily. "And yes," he said, "I did some of it for you. I will not pretend I did not. But I did not do it to be thanked. I did it because it needed doing. There is a difference." Vivian nodded once, slowly. She did not tug her glove. She had taken her gloves off in the front hall. "I have an answer for you," she said. "Yes." "It is yes." He did not move at first. He had not, perhaps, allowed himself to expect the word. When his face changed, it changed slowly, the way the room had changed when he had walked into the ballroom 3 months before. Something in the line of his shoulders eased, something in his mouth softened. He did not smile exactly. He breathed. "Miss Marchwood." "Vivian." "Vivian." He crossed the room then. Not quickly. He stopped a single pace from her. He did not touch her. He held his hand out, palm up between them, the way a man holds a hand out to a horse that has been frightened. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. She could feel the small calluses at the base of his fingers where he had held a rein for many years. She could feel the slight tremble that was not in his hand, but in the place where their 2 hands met. He did not pull her closer. He did not lift her hand to his mouth. He simply held it, and she held his back. And for a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire moved behind them. The clock ticked on the mantel. The smell of leather and beeswax and rain on the window mixed in the air. Outside a carriage passed, and the wheels rattled on the wet stones, and the sound was small and far away. "Vivian," he said, after a long time in his low, quiet voice, "I am very glad." "I know," she said. She said nothing else, and neither did he for a while. A year later, in the small breakfast room at Renfield in Hampshire, the autumn light came in through the long east window and made a square of pale gold on the carpet. The smell of fresh bread and bitter coffee and the cold green smell of the gardens beyond the open door mixed in the air. A small dog, a brown thing of no particular breed, who had not been at Renfield a year ago, lay across the hearthrug with his chin on his paws. The Duke was at the table reading a letter. His coat was off. His sleeves were turned back at the wrists. His hair was a little untidy, the way it was every morning before he remembered to attend to it. He had not yet poured his coffee. He was waiting. The Duchess came in. She wore a morning gown of dark blue, simply cut. Her hair was pinned without ceremony. She crossed to the sideboard, poured 2 cups of coffee with the easy motion of a woman who had done it many mornings now, and brought one to the table. She set the cup down at his elbow. As she set it down, she let her hand rest, for the small space of a breath, on the back of his neck. Her fingers were cool from the coffee pot. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He lifted his free hand and covered hers briefly. He did not look up from his letter. He did not need to either. She moved away. She took her own seat. She picked up the small book she had been reading the night before from where she had left it on her chair. She opened it to the page marked by a thin red ribbon. The dog by the fire sighed in his sleep and rolled onto his side. Outside, the wind moved in the elms beyond the lawn, and a few brown leaves blew across the stone of the terrace. Vivian touched the cuff of her sleeve, once lightly, where her glove would have been if she had been wearing one. Then she let her hand settle. She did not count anything. She had not counted anything in a long time. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.